Hey everybody, welcome. I'm Rick DiClemente. This is Liza Jane Brown, my partner, and together we're going to be talking about a lot of planets for you tonight. The purpose tonight, in case you've not been through some of our previous weeks, we've talked some about it, but we're going through some very major turning points astrologically, and I'm going to point them out to you individually right now. Then we're going to go into much detail. When I wrote newsletters for years, I would follow what was happening each month and what Venus was doing, what was Mars doing, what was the eclipse doing. And then all of a sudden, there came a time when Pluto just took over the story. And that was 2008, 2009, all the way till now. And then 2005 and 6, Eris took over, but we didn't know it yet. So there are certain things going on now that are really super duper heavyweight, and they're era changing. They're also epic changing, which means we've never even had anything like it. That's why what you're experiencing in the collective is so special. Let me show you, and we'll go from there. All right. I prepared a certain video, a certain graphic for you to see. In the middle here is the fixed chart of the United States, is one of them. There are about 7 different ones because nobody knows exactly what time the US was born. This is where the planets were on July the 4th, 1776. I'm not going to get into all that now. The outer circle is where they're at now. So they've gone round and round and round with the Earth in the middle. They've gone round and round and round until they're at now. Now I'm going to show you generically what we're going to do. Here's Pluto. Pluto has gone around the Earth. The Earth is in the middle. It's gone around the Earth in about 246 years. It's gone around the whole time. Can you see the mouse move? Good. Okay, it's gone around the whole time. Right now, Pluto is within an inch. It's within an inch of returning to that spot. This is called a Pluto return. It will not be exact till later, several months from now, but in 8 days from now, in 8 days, it's going to stop and go retrograde, and that's going to be very significant. When a planet's coming back to hit another planet and it stops just short, it's extremely significant. This is why all this stuff is happening in the streets. Okay, so Pluto's going to stop, go backward for a while, and then come back. It's going to go back and forth for several years. So this whole time is the Pluto return. Okay, great significance because it's an outer powerful planet. Neptune. Neptune is the spiritual planet. Neptune went around one time and returned in 1941. Anything significant happened by sea at that time? Okay. The Neptune return, Pearl Harbor. Then what Neptune did is going on beyond, it's gone 1.5 orbits now. It's gone one time around and now it's right here. So in about a few days from now, I think it's about 9 days from now, Neptune will be exactly opposite Neptune. These things are incredibly significant when the major planets do this. The other one is really major, is Eris, which was discovered 2005, 2006, is going so slowly, it's squaring Pluto. This is the big one now. This is the big one because you got the Pluto return setting up the era of the Pluto return, and along comes an irritant such as Eris. So we have a lot to talk about these. And oh, by the way, while we were looking at this, Jupiter is sitting on the moon, which is rather incidental for these kind of heavyweights, and they're having an Eris, a Chiron return. The Chiron return every 50 years. So we have 5 of these. This is very significant. But the main ones we're going to talk about are the Pluto return, the Neptune opposition to Neptune, and the Eris square to Pluto, which is humongous. So I thought that it's a great probability that you've gotten tired of hearing me talk all the time. So I've invited my better half to talk about these. Also, Liza has a much better handle on how society moves. And her point of view is going to be very, very helpful to add to the pile. So I thought what we would do tonight is start talking about what they're doing. So Pluto's coming back to Pluto. And the way I will start before I hand it off to you is I see a Pluto return like I left the house and I left all the teenagers in the house and I left them with $75,000. And I'm coming back a couple of years later to see what they did with the money. That's what a Pluto return is. It's not about the money, but Pluto endowed us with a lot of power when we found it in 1930. Now it's returning back from where it started. And when it started in 1776, we weren't aware of it. But we discovered it in 1930 when we calculated backward. So what do you think about the Pluto return that's going on with us now? We want to talk about what these things are doing, pro and con, and how to deal with it.
Well, he's really put me on the spot here tonight, guys. I hope I have enough to say. I'm nervous.
I think you have plenty.
Well, first of all, with Pluto coming back, and I know Rick has talked about this before in the US chart, but Pluto is the planet of rebirth and of death and of transformation. And it's up until we started discovering planets beyond Pluto, it was the most outward planet and the one that has the most profound influence on us as individuals and on the country or any other entity that you want to talk about. So with Pluto coming back in the US chart to the same place it was before, and Rick has talked about this a lot, but it's Pluto, and he was just implying that with talking about the kids in the house with all the money. Pluto's coming back to find out how we have been doing since Pluto was back there before. I mean, Pluto at the birth of our country and what it was doing then was very significant because we were such an experiment in so many ways, and an experiment in democracy, an experiment with all of this land at our disposal. What are we going to do with it? What we know now as we look back, I think Pluto is looking at us now and seeing how we've been handling that whole slavery thing. Really, I mean, I think that's a big deal.
Very big. The main thing is saying, have you used or abused your energy?
Yes.
That's what it does, and it's a very black and white, harsh judge. It's just going to tell you what it has found.
And if whatever entity is, each of us as individuals or a country or whatever, if we haven't been using the energy well, then Pluto can signify the decay and death of whatever that entity is. So we have a lot to think about that. I mean, it's really serious in astrological terms. What we're what we're doing as a country is going to determine our outcome. I'm an Aquarian, so I'm all about, the individual and the group working together for positive change. And I think that if we look at what's going on with Pluto, it might urge us to try to take more of an active part in what's going on with our country today, because Pluto has made things pretty darn serious. But Rick has probably talked about Pluto in like the higher and the lower dimensions. It can be very underhanded and can be very much negative energy if the one malicious if one aspect of Pluto is expressed. But it's also a very high-minded energy in terms of that transformation and that rebirth. So What else do you want to say about that?
Well, a couple of things about it. When you go down the basement and you see all this junk and you don't want to see it and you walk away and you come back a year later and you go down the basement and it's getting a little worse and you come back later. Okay, this is very symbolic. It happens on individual level. It oftentimes messes with your plumbing in the foundation because Pluto is the undercurrent, the rocks underneath. But there comes that day when you go down the basement and you say to your husband or your partner, you say, look, we just can't take it anymore. The whole place is going to crumble. We got to deal with that. That's when Pluto is exact for the first time. That's why I have coined 4 phrases, 4 time periods during a Pluto return or Pluto aspect. This phase 1 is, oh my God, we can't deny this anymore. Phase 1 is we're going to keep denying it. Phase 2, which is where the United States is now, it's so bad and it uncovers so many termites. It uncovers so much corruption down below that you're just knocked out by. That's what's been happening since 2008. We've been discovering how much corruption in all different kinds of senses. It's not that the corruption started then, but that's when Pluto started becoming obvious. Stage 3 of a Pluto time is what America is doing now. We're starting to deal with this. Very much indicated between the contrast between the Trump presidency and the Biden presidency. We're starting to pick ourselves back up and trying to repair things. It's that in stage 3, you still got the smoke and dirt to deal with it, but you're starting to see light at the end of the tunnel. We're real far from stage 4. Stage 4 is once we have been rebuilt and we're starting to see nothing but light. So we're very far from that. And yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to also remind people that Pluto in mythology was associated with great wealth. And you've heard the term plutocrat, meaning, kind of wealthy people, politicians. And I think that there's certainly an emphasis on that in the world today as well, like because all of the wealth is, so much of the wealth of the world is concentrated in the hands of a few people. And so I think we're being tested as to how we can change that, or how that's going to change if it is, so that those things can be made, things about wealth and money and resources, natural resources can they be redistributed in a way that's more healthy for the planet and all of the people. And Pluto also has been associated with, it's associated with the Earth in terms of major changes like earthquakes and volcanoes and tsunamis and things like that. And certainly as we have seen in the past, how many number of years since Pluto's changed signs, an increase in those
13.
Those kinds of events in the world.
She called this in 05 when I met her. She kept saying we're going to start getting plate tectonic changes. We're going to start seeing it with the oil. We're going to start seeing it down deep. And she was exactly right. And it's interesting that we met 2005 when Eris was discovered. That's kind of interesting too. But yeah, Pluto rules down deep what's under, what's really inside you. And that's why when you see a Scorpio who's looking right through you, and Pluto rules Scorpios, it's because they are. They are looking right through you. And what are they looking at? They're looking down deep in your soul to see where you're really coming from. And if you want a license plate sticker, the sticker should say, "Don't try to fool Scorpio," because they're looking right at you.
Another thing about Pluto is that it has to do with the subconscious and the collective unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we've seen a much greater recognition in the past number of years as Pluto's had been getting ready to oppose itself, in the recognition of that, and the recognition of that we all are much deeper as individuals than we thought. that we have these connections with other people and the planet in general, and animals and everything else. I think that understanding that, and it's one of the themes that I was going to kind of run through what I'm going to talk about tonight, or when I chip in, is that we have a greater sense of relationship with everything else on the earth, and that hopefully that is beginning to determine some of the major decisions that we have to make as individuals in this country.
Now, I want you I want you to demarcate between two things in your mind, then you'll get a little clearer. In 1930, Pluto was in a sign of Cancer. Okay, we had never seen Pluto before. Okay, in astrology, until somebody sees it, the planet doesn't exist. Then when you see it, it's really significant because it indicates that the psyche is ready to own that part of the collective power. So in 1930, not only did we see Hitler, but we also saw atomic power. And so in 1930, Pluto became on the map. Now, when you look back, way back beyond 1930, and you see people born like Carl Jung, and Tesla, we certainly put it on their chart. In other words, these people were so conscious that Pluto was working in their mind. Maybe they weren't even aware of it, but once it was put onto their chart in 1930, we could certainly see how powerful it really was in those two individuals. Now, the next thing about that. So even though Pluto went through Cancer, and what was our parents' generation like? Family, 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 family. Then it went into Leo. What did we see? We saw the baby boomers and the individual, not the family, but the individual, not the family, but me. What about me? Then Pluto went into Virgo, and we saw the yuppies come along and largely tell us that the hippie thing ain't working. We all need to be much more down to earth. Then it went into Libra, and you saw all the fashion change, and you saw all the change that went on with people in their relationships. Now the Scorpio people are growing up, and they really mean business because the Pluto and Scorpios are in their 30s. But the point is, now Pluto's been in our consciousness for 90 years, but now Pluto's coming back around to where it started. That's a different story. So now the Pluto is coming back in terms of where the Pluto was planted like a seed in 1776. And if you erase all this other stuff, just the Pluto return is so enormous. So what does Pluto do? And I'll give this back to Liza. What does Pluto do is very simple. Are you going to get with it and evolve or not? And if you're going to get with evolution, we're going to support you. We'll give you money, we'll give you books, we'll give you movies, we'll give you advocates, we'll give you what you need to help you. And if you're not, we're going to get rid of you. Now, what's interesting to me is this. I had to nervously approach this subject. We met in 2005 or 2006, I can't remember which. But we were very nervous about talking about the world's close to ending. We talked to each other about it. We talked to each other about it 2 years ago. We're still nervous about talking about it. Now, all of a sudden, people aren't nervous about talking about it because it's much more of a frightful reality. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. But like Liza was saying to you, if you get with it, and what does Pluto mean by getting with it? It means that owning your power. Hold on. Okay, so when you get with it, Pluto senses this. The force of evolution starts working through you and working with you. And what does Pluto do? It just totally revamps your life. Okay, And okay, so what do you see?
Well, I think this is something that I talked about before when I was on, about how now that especially people in the West are living longer, we have more of an opportunity to take advantage and more responsibility, I could say now, of these transits of the outer planets. We have the opportunity to understand what these archetypes mean and to try to make them the best of them, such as Pluto's purity and healing power, and ability to come together. I think that we have a better understanding of the quantum nature of reality, which is something that I'm also, is kind of a theme of what I wanted to be talking about tonight. And back to when Rick was talking about Jung and Tesla, and who were you saying, Tesla?
Yeah.
Well, all the physicists at the time, Niels Bohr and the others who were doing work on the nature of the atom and coming up with quantum theory. Quantum theory was really going to the depths of what material reality is, at the same time that Jung was going to the depths of what was in the psyche. And I think, John, we were talking earlier about cosmos and psyche, and that's basically, you know, the same, not dichotomy, but you're saying that the cosmos is the same as psyche when you're talking about quantum reality, and they were both being beginning to be understood at the same time.
Cosmos and Psyche is probably the greatest astrology book ever written, probably by Richard Tarnas. It took him 30 years to write it, Cosmos and Psyche. And it's about the history of the outer planets and what they did at World War II, what they did with the ancient Greeks, and what they did at all these times. And he maps out what did Pluto do when it squared Saturn, what did Pluto do when it was opposite Saturn, and he worked with the outer planets. And you may want to read the book. It's heavy reading, but it's largely a reference book too. One of the things that we can't take for granted, because we're astrologers for 80 some years, to the newbie, when you talk about the outer planets are not Venus, and they're not the sun, and they're not the moon, and they're not Mercury, because they move very slowly. Now, they actually move very fast, but they're so far away that they go through the zodiac very slowly. And those forces, the slower they go and farther out they are more powerful in astrology. And that's why your articles in the magazines and on a lot of astrology websites are about Venus and Mars and Jupiter, things that are changing every week or every weekend. You see a lot of publicity on them and on YouTube, because people are keeping up with what's happening on day to day. But the big environmental epochal changes come about with the big ones, Pluto and Eris, etc. Now, the reason we're going to get off of Pluto and summarize it by saying that Pluto's job is to be the garbage cleaner. Okay? And think of what your community would be like if you didn't have garbage truck. That's exactly what Pluto does. It gets rid of the garbage. So you can either build and take your garbage out as you're going, which is an evolutionary kind of responsibility, or you can leave the garbage behind, in which case he's going to back up on you and all kind of untoward things happen. The next thing to look at that's happening to us collectively as far as the United States, because the Pluto return is a United States thing. It's not a universal thing, but it is a universal thing. The Pluto return is happening in our chart, but since we are the symbolic head of the world until we get toppled, what happens in our chart happens to everybody. So that's the difference. If a Pluto return were happening in England's chart, other countries wouldn't feel it. So moving on to Neptune, because the Neptune is taking place in our chart too. So let's go back to that one, Liza. let's go back to the Neptune. Let me get it on your screen. Okay. Share. Okay. Here's Neptune, 1776. It goes around. It comes back 164 years later. It comes back and has to go. It has to catch up to the point where Neptune is. In this case, Neptune started here. When did Neptune come back to the point it started? It came back in 1941. I'll tell you anything more about that. Then it continued, and right now Neptune is here. So not only are we having a Pluto return, we're having Neptune opposite Neptune. So you want to go into Neptune? We'll talk about that a bit before we go into the others.
Well, Rick talked about it being, it returned in 41, right? Okay. And so now it's opposite. And what that says to me is that, well, first of all, the archetype of Pluto is also very complex, as it is, especially for the other outer planets. But it has two different sides
You
to
mean
it.
with Neptune?
Or Neptune, sorry. It has at least two different sides, if not more. But what we're going to talk about now is one side is very spiritual and compassionate and giving and loving, and the other side of Neptune can be very delusional. It can be operate underhandedly. It can be involved in conspiracy,
con artists,
those kinds of things. So there are many inflections other than that, but that's probably a simplified.
Anybody seen the America go through a delusional cloud lately?
Yeah.
Nah. Other countries have been saying, what the hell's going on over there? They've been wondering what's happening. Neptune, the Christ-like planet.
Yeah. So I think that given that opposition of Neptune to its natal position right now, the country, as I think you all can see, is pretty divided right now. Some people are very progressive and are operating out of a sense of Neptune's love, and they want to bring the country together.
Neptune's oneness.
They want to make everything fair and better for everybody and take care of everybody. And then the other side of Neptune is can be very afraid of things and can spread. And there's you're seeing a lot of misinformation. One of the things that I was thinking about earlier, Rick, was that when we used to talk about Neptune in the old days in terms of like the internet and all the social media, which was in its earlier stage, we weren't really thinking so much about the downside of that. We were thinking how this is going to pull the world together because we'd all be able to communicate and we'd all be able to understand each other. But it's become very obvious that in addition to the wonderful things about all social media, there's a downside because of all the disinformation and being deception and being swamped with advertising and not being able to really use it the way we want to. So there are definitely two sides of that we're experiencing.
Well, Neptune is much more basic than what we think because we don't understand it clearly. Neptune is the part of you that wants to go home. It's that simple. It's the part of you that's Christ-like and it wants to return you to that blissful state inside. So, since Neptune was discovered in the 1800s, which is about the time spiritualism and seances were starting, gases were discovered. These are all Neptunian things. The thing about Neptune, it's definitely the hardest planet to track. When a client's going through a Neptune time, it's the time when I want to check out because I can't do much for them. Neptune is a time when you're having a spiritual crisis. And what does that mean? That means that you need to get in touch with the God within you. I'm not going to preach about it. It's just That's simple. The God within. And if you get in touch with that part of yourself, that part grows. And that's the part of you that's the opposite of the worldly part. And Neptune traditionally, when it hits you, will not support your physical activities. You won't get the job promotion traditionally. It's trying to advance you spiritually. And when you're trying to make your whole life materialistic, it just won't support you. So what happens with Neptune, with the delusions, is we fool ourselves. What's real common with Neptune times is we become deluded. I don't like this. I'm tired of this. I'm bored with this. I'm bored with my life here. I'm bored with this. I'm bored with that. Well, the reason you're bored with it is because nothing can stand up to the bliss that's available to you inwardly. Everything looks bad when it's compared to that. But what ends up happening, it's the number one planet when people start affairs. It's the number one planet for alcoholism and drug use. What happens is people, they get so fed up with what they're dissatisfied by that they start to confuse going home with escaping. That's the traditional problem with Pisces, Neptune, the ruler. Escaping is not the same as going back home. Going back home is escaping in the sense that you're escaping the myth that you're in the physical universe and escaping it and going back to where you're called. But the Neptune misuse is to use it inappropriately. So what did we see? We saw a lot of deception. We saw people you want to just say, "What are you doing? 76 million people voting for this guy. Don't you see what he's doing to you? Don't you see?" And we saw a collective cult, which is exactly what Neptune does. So on the other side of that, and I can speak to this clearly, I started a radio show in 1982, 83, 84, and I talked to people about spirituality and stuff. They didn't know what I was talking about. And I talked to them in 1990. I talked to them in 2000. They didn't know. But man, people are coming on fast. The Neptune opposition to Neptune, people are really growing fast. They're really getting with it.
It's a decline of the traditional churches, but people's sense of spirituality is growing.
Exactly. This has nothing to do with the churches, exact. But when you have Neptune opposite Neptune, what happens is any opposition in astrology has a seventh house connotation. One planet's here, one planet's here. The planet started here, it's gone around, now it's opposite. Well, in astrology, when planets are opposite each other, that's the seventh house. In astrology, first house, seventh house. So in astrology, the seventh house is relationships. And what that comes down to is very simple. Are you going to be straight with others? Are you going to be straight with them? You're going to try to deceive them? Or are you going to be straight with them? And the more and more Liza and I talk about this stuff, it more and more comes back to Jesus 101. Jesus 101, treat others as you want to be treated yourself. So we're being tested as a nation. How are we being straight with each other? Are we making more laws to protect the criminals? Are we protecting the victims? You're seeing the fight go on in both places. This war is going on. We're going to get to Eris later, which is the fight that's in the street going on with Black Lives Matter. That's coming up pretty soon. But good.
Weren't you seeing that the NRA, the position of of Neptune in the chart of the NRA was coinciding with
I was seeing Neptune destroy the GOP.
The GOP. Okay.
The GOP's chart, Neptune went over the sun of the GOP's chart in 2018. And I kept telling people for about 15 years, you're going to see the dissolution of the GOP. And that's why people are looking at each other like, what's happened to that party? What's happened? And what's happened is very simple. Neptune went over their sun. And if they were exhibiting spiritual values, they would have been enhanced. But they were found to be bankrupt spiritually. And that's why they've been decaying. And that's why they grabbed onto this boat that was floating by called the Trump boat. And now they're in a stage where they're looking at each other like, what the hell's happened. They don't know what to do with their party. So these planets are all very positive unless you're out of touch with the true meaning, in essence, of what they represent. So in our country, you're seeing for sure people leaving churches. And I'm not talking anti-God here. I'm talking about people don't want spiritual experience to be with the pastor up front. They want the spiritual experience to be with everybody in the church, all of them. So spiritually, we are changing dramatically. How else do you see it? I mean, it certainly wraps itself around all your social experience, and Neptune is about seeing everybody as alike. Neptune is the opposite of Virgo. Virgo sees the differences. Neptune is seeing what's similar, what's alike.
Well, again, you can see two extremes in the country, but I think that we are all developing some sort of sense of compassion for people. I think that more and more people are supportive of the whole immigrant issue, and understanding that we have to do something to help people who are in other countries who are having difficulty for political or economic or social reasons.
You are, excuse me 1 second. You're exactly right. What would Christ say if some boat washed ashore and you're in Greece and some boat came across from Tunisia and you got these people that want something to eat? Just unbelievable how we have responded in good and bad ways. But Neptune very much is like, what would Christ do? That's what Neptune is. Good.
Well, I hope that that President Biden is able to accomplish much of his agenda, but that is his agenda is, for the most part, it seems to be anyway at this point, very compassionate in a Neptunian way, and trying to take care of people inside the country, as well as standing up for people in other parts of the world.
And if you can't sense it, if you haven't been around astrology enough, you can sense the Pluto inside of President Biden. Biden is a Scorpio. And the true high Scorpios, not the low-level Scorpios, the high ones see the problem. They bring out compassion of the heart, and they start attacking the problem. And they speak in terms of, let's all work together. We're powerful together. And you can sense this with him. It's not just him getting older and all the tough things he's been through. Remember, before he had to compromise. He doesn't have to now. He was a senator. But you see the real Pluto power. Pluto is an awesome power. Any Scorpio you talk to, when you ask them what sign they are, they'll always say, Scorpio. Scorpio. Okay. Because there's a lot of negative connotation to Scorpios, because some of the bad ones give you all bad rap, but some of the great ones really can represent you really well. It's a very powerful sign. So along with the Pluto return, which is a big time identity crisis, the Pluto return is, well, I thought we were apple pie and baseball. And we're starting to find out we're not all that stuff, not all that fluff. And we got a second definition of the American dream. And the Neptune now is coming back and it's giving us a trial and a test to become stronger spiritually. When these planets hit each other, this is a real problem with beginning astrology students. When you're new at astrology, these planets hitting one another scare the hell out of you. You know, when we were young and we're looking at the ephemeris and we're looking at Mars is going to square Mars. Oh my God. And we're looking at the sun's going to get hit by Saturn. Oh my God. I mean, that's just normal when you're new because you don't know how to react. But when you get older, become more emeritus with the planets, you start to see that these planets are massive planets of opportunity. They're lined up. And yeah, there will be stress along the Neptune line, but speak of the positive that can come out of the Neptune. Neptune's about being boundless and being loving.
Right.
So we're seeing it everywhere.
Yes. Yeah. I think we are starting to understand again that we have to help each other on the planet. We're not isolated anymore, and I think some of that comes out as starts out anyway as people having enlightened self-interest, but then it becomes much deeper, I think. So.
Well, this is a phrase that Liza uses a lot, and we all need to use it a whole lot. You don't hear it that much. Enlightened self-interest, which is an Aquarian principle. And you notice that we don't see Aquarius in the topics today, only generally. And that means that what I do for you is going to end up benefiting me. And where we get wrong so much is the United States is so Cancerian or so lunar, and Cancerian energy or lunar energy is about taking care of me. I got mine, go get yours. I saw a post one time on Facebook. It said, here's this person with he's a have, and this other person's a have not. And the have said to the have not, well, become a have, will you? Just go become a have, we'll be all right. Flip a little switch. So this is the downside when your whole country's based on lunar energy. There's too much focus on just taking care of me. And the Republican Party is a Cancer entity with a moon in Scorpio. And that mentality is not going to work. Neither is the old Democratic principle. We need more Aquarian ideals. We need new Aquarian thought principles. Here in Pennsylvania, Liza's not working with the Democrats. She's working with the New Deal Democrats. And what was FDR? An Aquarian. I'm going to talk about the difference between how you see what you're setting up versus the old school.
Well,
I promise not to put her on the spot.
Yeah, she's put me on the spot.
Yeah, but I know how smart she is, and she can handle this. What are you seeing with the new politics? They're doing what?
Well, there are a lot of, as many of you probably know, a lot of progressive political organizations cropping up. The New Deal Democrats is of Fayette County, where we live, is an organization that I was part of starting the month after Trump was elected president.
Oh.
And we're basically, we're getting some younger people, but we're basically a bunch of people whose values were formed in the 1960s, and which are pretty progressive values, although we're getting people from all age groups at this point. But we're more interested in, traditional, in my mind, traditional Democrats can be more interested in, they're less liberal financially and regarding capitalism, and more interested in supporting big business, whereas progressive Democrats are more interested in sharing resources among all the people. So we could talk about that more. But when you're talking about working in politics at the grassroots level, like we are, you are not really getting involved in money issues for the most part, unless you can get elected as a county commissioner and have some influence over how grants are, what grants you can get and how grant monies are
But
used.
wouldn't you say that the new Democratic Party is just flat out more idealistic?
Well, yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, and those ideals are what?
Well, about equality and justice and fairness.
Okay, which leads us to the topic of Eris, okay? Because you were telling me today in your definitions and your research, Eris is about fairness and
justice.
Justice, okay. If you're not acquainted with Eris, Here's what she's doing now, and she's really the story now. Most astrologers aren't even tracking her. She's the story now. Here's why. All right, here's Eris. This is one of her symbols. She has another symbol which looks like a downward facing Mars. The symbol for Mars, instead of the arrow pointing up, the arrow points down. So that's the other symbol for Eris. And Eris moves very, very slowly. She takes 540 years to go around. 540 years. So there's not many things on Earth that you can track that are 540 years old. In my lifetime, she started at 6, now she's at 24, my whole life. So she's moving very fast, but she's so far away. And it just so happens that we found out about her 2005, 2006, right around the time that the mythical Pluto got demoted, which was nonsense. But look at what Eris is doing. She's at a right angle to Pluto. So in astrology, this is like, I'm in the middle of a hard operation here. I'm in the middle of this massive internal operation, and you're bugging me with this at the same time? That's what's happening to the United States. And what I've been saying with the square, the right angle, that's what I've been saying to people for years, is how much can the patient take? The patient is on the gurney and being operated on, and there's all this corruption being found, and there's all this soreness being found here, weakness being found there, et cetera, and all of a sudden you've got a new planet that's squaring Pluto. This is what has made the era stupendously different. Now Eris, I'm going to talk about her nature, what she's like.
Well,
she's a female goddess.
Oh, I think you shared that with some people here before, but Eris was one of the goddesses in the Greek pantheon of gods and goddesses, and the gods and goddesses were having a party, and everybody was invited except Eris, and she decided that was not very fair, and she's not known to be polite and sweet about things, even though she's a female energy. And so she decided to disrupt this party, because if she wasn't going to have fun, then nobody else was either. So she tossed a golden ball? Apple to the middle of this group. Mm-hmm. And why don't you pick the story up from there?
Engraved on the apple was, who was the fairest of them all? Who is the fairest of all of you? And of course, all the females there start fighting about their beauty until he disrupts the party. And that's where she got the rap, or the coining of the phrase of being the goddess of discord. So when you examine her closely, she can't stand unfairness. She can't stand a Peter principle, somebody being raised to a level of a position where they really can't function. She can't stand the idea of somebody getting something unfairly, and she can't stand injustice, and she has had it. So you can do your Black Lives Matter, and you could do your White Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter and all you want, but it's coming from Eris in the collective. It started in 2005, 2006, and now we see her in direct aspect to Pluto. So we're seeing, just a neutral, basic astrologer, we're seeing that the country is on the edge. How are we going to continue if we don't face these issues? And you can't BS these issues. You don't BS stuff when Pluto's around. And you certainly don't BS stuff when Eris is around. Because these two planets are really similar, real similar. One wants to blow things up, the other one wants to burn things down. And they turn towards each other and say, okay, it's all right. But they're not negative on purpose. They're saying we're either going to make it fair or it's going to blow up. Go ahead.
Well, I was.
There's plenty enough to talk about Eris.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, I was thinking as we watch the news all the time, we're looking at it and saying, oh, well, that's the shadow side of Eris that's operating, right. And that's the positive side of Eris that's operating. Right. And so I started thinking about the different sides of Eris in terms of right. fairness. And I think that you'll know you've heard people who are more on the right, who are for gun rights and are not so supportive of Black Lives Matter, for example, saying things, well, but it's not fair. And if you look at that, as I looked at it, I thought, but that's not my definition of fair. You know, what is it with somebody who says that? And I started thinking that people who are not sympathetic to fairness right. and justice, but talk about things being fair, are talking about things being fair to them. Right. And that, I think, is related to fears that people have, that there's not going to be enough for me if they have something, or I need my gun to protect myself because I'm afraid, you know, somebody's going to come and get me, or I'm going to lose whatever. And I think it boils down to like a basic primal fear. But what happens is they don't realize that if it's not fair to everybody, it's not really fair to them.
Which is an Aquarian principle. It's not to the people that believe that. What's happening to the negative side of Eris is, I'm left out. What about me? I'm left out. They're coming and taking my bread. They can't have my bread. What do you mean my bread? I'm not going to share it with them. So they're getting the moon. They're getting the moon confused with Eris. The moon is so primitive compared to something universal like Eris. And like you were talking about, the ones who are saying it's only okay if it's fair to me are not following the tenets of evolution. And Pluto's behind all this. Remember, this is a Pluto Eris time. And Pluto's saying you're going to evolve or I'm going to do away with you. And Pluto's not going to include you in the party if you only want to be fair to you. It's not going to. Pluto's it's a very altruistic, fair planet. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, talking about Black Lives Matter and talking about what you're seeing happening with the courts and what you're seeing in the streets, there's a power to the Blacks now. There's a power to the African American people now and other brown people because it's time. And you don't just say it's time because it's time. It's time because Eris is there. And I'll guarantee you, if Eris weren't there, it would not be time. It just won't be. They're one and the same. Every event must have a planet with it. They just have to be. They're one and the same. And what did we do? We reached out somewhere. We brought this new planet, and she's badass. And did you notice how for the real overall concept, the blacks in these cities and the kids have been murdered, they could have really had some big time riots by now. There could have been some really bad fires compared to what happened in the 60s, etc. But people are behaving, they're organizing, they're getting to the polls in Georgia. They turned the election around. They're using true power. So what's happening now is a lot of people, I was talking to Liza earlier, a lot of people are not recognizing Eris. They don't know what it is. They're recognizing it and they're classifying it incorrectly, or they're classifying it correctly. So Eris is coming up within us, and you're starting to see this permeate all the kids and all their lessons in schools and the kind of TV shows that you're seeing now. You're seeing more talk about climate change. You're seeing that we're starting to get ready for a year from now when Pluto goes into Aquarius.
Couple of years.
Okay, it's close enough. A couple of years. A couple of years from now, and Pluto goes into Aquarius, and that surely is your topic.
Okay. Well, first of all, I do want to say one thing that we've talked about is certainly Pluto and Eris are similar, but address
They're similar.
what is different about this now that Eris
Right.
is on the stage and is there with Pluto. It's a new sense of determination of and understanding that things are going to change. It seems like, I don't know if you want to say there's more hope, but there's more resolve on the part of everybody that we're not gonna blow this off anymore. We're not gonna blow
Yeah,
this.
and also there's this new sense that, by God, it's not just rhetoric. We really are one world.
Yes.
And that's just rather
behind it.
recent,
Yeah.
because we didn't meet each other till the 90s.
Mhm.
1995 is when the world met each other through the thing called Windows and the internet. But you're exactly right.
But you know, Pluto going into Aquarius is going to lend a very different flavor to what's going on in the world, and we're starting probably to feel it now. And it's hard to separate these energies. Part of it might be Eris, but Pluto and Capricorn, we talked a lot about that over the years and how Pluto had to do with our institutions and all of our belief systems and things that we thought were never going to change. And they started to change when Pluto went into Capricorn. The day Pluto went into Capricorn was when Goldman Sachs failed. Is that what the bank it was?
It was just January 25th of 08.
And we watched all these financial institutions started to fail. We started to see corruption like in the churches and the Boy Scouts.
It was so powerful that the actual collapse of a lot of these institutions were happening in late 07 because it was so close. And then once 08 came, boom.
So that we also started to see, as we talked about all of these, a more frequency of things like tidal waves and volcanoes erupting and earthquakes and weather, more intense weather that we're still dealing with now. And who knows, we might be dealing with it forever. So the time with Pluto in Capricorn was kind of, as you always said, testing the foundations of our institutions and our belief systems.
Right.
And if you look back, your belief systems probably changed a lot during those times. But with Pluto going into Aquarius, that is a whole different energy. I mean, it's going to be Pluto, but it's going to be inflected with more sense of what we've been talking about brotherhood and thinking that we're all going to be working together. It's going to be hopefully the applications of technology that will be used to help us with climate change and all the other challenges that we're facing. I think it's also, I think it started already, and there are probably other things that have helped with this, but with all of our growing acceptance of things around gender issues and gender equality and accepting people who identify in different ways as far as their gender or their sexual orientation, and accepting families in different combinations.
Right.
And understanding and it's kind of like the whole, what you always say, I want to give you a Coke, we are the world. We really are having that sense that, you know, even though we're all different, we all have something to contribute and that we can all care for and work together. So I think that's kind of a forerunner of, those are some forerunners of Pluto in Aquarius. And it's also, what was I going to say? We don't know when the age of Aquarius, quote, is actually supposed to start, but it's not going to be that far in the future. And I've always thought that Pluto going into Aquarius is going to be a harbinger of that, or maybe hasten that whole age of Aquarius era.
Yeah, let me explain to you a little bit about what that means. People have got the ages confused with Pluto in Aquarius. two different things. The ages are very difficult to explain. They go on for over 2,000 years. We've been in the age of Pisces. We've been in the age of Pisces since Christ, and we back up, till we back up into the age of Aquarius, and that'll go till the year 4,000. They go backward, the ages. That's not what we're talking about here. In 1995, when Windows was discovered, Pluto was entering Sagittarius. Okay, Sagittarius is a big deal because it's how the world communicates on a global scale. And look what happened when Windows came out. Everything changed. I remember in 1990, 5 years before that, I sent a mail message to somebody at University of Minnesota, and they kept it and sent it back to me. And I was, wow, I could send a message to somebody. It was a big deal then. So as the 90s came along, in 95, we saw the Pluto spending 15 years or 13 years or whatever it was 13 years, from 95 to 08. Pluto was going through Sag. And during those years, what else did we see? Mortgage, loan, credit card, borrow from the future, very Sagittarian principles. And then in January of 08, boom, right there. Pluto went from Sag into Capricorn, and that's when the bills came due. And that's when Capricorn is very responsible, and it doesn't shun its responsibilities, it faces them. So since 08, we've been looking at institutions that we thought were A-OK and finding out that they really weren't. This is all with Bernie Madoff time and all that happened. So since 08, we've been finding that out, and it's going to go till 2023, which is only 2 years away. So it just so happens that Pluto is now 26 something, and the natal Pluto is at 26 something in the United States chart. So that's a sensitive point in the whole thing. So Pluto is coming back to where it started from, and then it's going to start to go into Aquarius. And the way these things work, you don't get Pluto in Capricorn. Next day you get all Aquarius. It's not that black and white with the signs. There are cusps. So we're going to get very Capricornian flavors, and we have been, and it's starting to get very Aquarian. And like she's saying, if we need anything, we need the Pluto and Aquarius age to get started. We need people to start to think like Aquarians all along are saying, well, I don't know why we can't get along, but people are not like Aquarians. One of the biggest problems in astrology is thinking that other people are like you. And they're just not. If you're Aquarian, you're thinking, well, they must be thinking like I do, but they don't. People think like their sun sign in a large degree. And as we start to become more Aquarian, thank God, we're going to start thinking as one. You know, how can we clean up the oceans? How can we clean up the air? But we're still hanging on to, which is very much a Capricornian thing called, what's the type of government, economic system that we have?
Capitalism.
Yeah. Capitalism is a very Capricornian thing. I hate to say it, but it is. And Aquarius is not. You get around Aquarians, and they're very idealistic. They want to think about what's best for everybody. And they're very, very underrated. So it's going to go into Aquarius. It's going to stay there about, I think, 17 years, something like that. And the age of Aquarius is starting or about to start. It's a much more gradual thing. Nobody knows exactly, but it's around now. It's around now. The age of Aquarius is starting. And you can see that the Pluto in Pisces age has been the 2,000 years since Jesus. Now, I'm not so sure what happened that was so Piscean, but imagine if it weren't. Now we're going back up into Aquarius for the next 2,000 years. And that's got two sides too. The Aquarius is not all roses. One side is we all get along and we all share the planet. The other one is kind of aloof and different and more about me and my independence. So we got to be careful with that too. But the big thing that's going on now, which we must address, is this. Without a doubt, the big thing that's happening right now, and this is massive, is Eris is square to Pluto. It's going to go back and forth. Pluto's going to go back and forth, and these are two heavyweights. Here's what they have in common. Pluto says, I'm all for you evolving. If you don't evolve, we'll get rid of you. Eris is about, we're going to be fair to everybody and just to everybody. And if you're not, we're going to blow it up. What's different about them is Eris is more explosive. Eris is more wild. Pluto is more of the ruling of the masses. But when you get the two combining now, what we're seeing is everybody's kind of looking at each other now and they're saying, what the hell are we going to do? Because we're realizing the changes have to take place on such a massive scale. And that's got to start where? With the grassroots campaigns, with your local communities, right? With the voting rights. And we're out there fighting them night and day right now just to be able to vote. If you want to throw somebody in jail for giving them a glass of water, it's just getting ridiculous. That kind of thinking has to go, or we're toast. Tell me about that book you got.
Well, it's related to everything that we've been talking about. Is anyone familiar with this book called My Grandmother's Hands?
My Grandmother's Hands.
Have you read it, Marcia?
All right, I'm going to turn the
Okay.
I'm going to turn the microphones to where you can turn yourself on if you like. Mute all, allow, okay. And let's take a look. And Marcia's on.
Yes, I just read about it.
Okay.
You know, you can read in the paper about books that have been talked about, but yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it because I'm going to write it down again.
What's so special about that book?
I just got it in the mail yesterday, but I found it I turned the radio on Saturday morning when I was on my way to the grocery store, and I heard the author interviewed on the radio, and it was just galvanizing. The author's name is Resmaa, Resmaa, and his last name is Menakem, Menakem, called My Grandmother's Hands. And he is a social worker and a therapist. He's a Black man. And the reason that I'm bringing this book up in the context of what we're talking about tonight is because we've talked about how we want to move, and we're all trying to move from fear and injustice, as we've talked about under Eris and Pluto and Neptune and the other planets tonight. But how do we do that? How do we move from not being afraid, and how do we move to justice? And you know, especially with the George Floyd, everything that's been happening with his murder on up until and probably beyond, you know, the sentencing of the man that murdered him. We are all so aware of the work we need to do to heal the issues, all issues, but especially those between the races. And this book talks about a way to do that healing. And he talks about how just getting together and talking is probably not going to be enough, because he feels, and actually there's some evidence, physiological evidence that explains some of this, but that there's residual fear between what he calls white bodies and Black bodies, because he feels that the trauma of generations of racial discord has been stored in our DNA and in our brain structures. And there's been some research that really supports that theory. And even though we all can sit down together with the best of intentions and sit and try to relate and talk to each other, there's still that residual ancestral and physiological fear in us that prevents us from doing this the best that we can, that it's very difficult to come together and solve these issues, knowing that we have this trauma stored in our body. And he talks about, he's just a wonderful writer. He expresses this all in such a compassionate and understanding way for everybody. And this is a book for people, as he would call, with white bodies and Black bodies, talking about the experiences that we have and how we can help resolve that fear. And I've just read a little bit of it, so I can't speak to it much more than that, other than to say, I know that he says, and he quotes people as saying that the healing of the fear that we have between the races has to start with the body, because that's where it is based. And if I don't know if any of you have done any work or studied anything about the nature of trauma, but if the literature also has quotes research about trauma being in the body, and that we react to trauma, and as this author's talking about, it's ancestral at this point, but we react to it with our what he calls our lizard brain before it even gets to our thinking brain, where we can sort it all out logically. We don't even have time to do that because we have such a quick reaction to it in our lizard brain. I can't think
reptile.
Of it. Reptile. I can't think of what it's medically called. But anyway,
amygdala?
I'm not sure. But anyway, he has exercises that you can do to address the trauma at that level, so that you can relax enough to really relate to everybody as another person. And my feeling is, I haven't finished reading the book, but that it's not just ancestral trauma between Black and white people, but between all people, and just our own trauma that we deal with within ourselves, maybe related to what we experienced in childhood.
Or tribal.
Yeah, tribal. So anyway, I just think that this book, from what I know from listening to the author talk about, and what I've read so far, is really groundbreaking. And these exercises, the way he explains things in the book, are so enlightening, and the exercises are so easy to do. And I've actually tried one of them already, and I had Rick try one, and I really felt a difference just getting anxious about something that had happened in my past that was related to something I had to face. So I would be interested in, if any of you read it, if you would share with that at some time, or if you have any comments on it now.
A couple of things I want to do before I get to the end. And at the end, I would like for you to give us a little bit of what you know about Mr. Eisenstein. I think that's important. I would like to take advantage of the situation here that we have such brilliant people together. I would like to direct a couple of questions, if I may, to Deneen. I want to ask both Dr. Johns. I'm calling him a doctor, but you're both Dr. Johns. I have specific questions I want to ask you, and I want to ask Linda a question too. I would like to start with Deneen. And I know I'm putting you on the spot, but I only do it because I know you're very quick and you're very knowledgeable. Deneen was on this show as our guest a couple of months ago. She's a phenomenal, amongst other things, a phenomenal shaman here in Pittsburgh. Deneen, I want to ask you, especially I saw your ears perk up when she talked about trauma being stored in the body. Now, I know you work with people, you worked with me. I know you work with people on all kinds of levels. You got a marvelous book out. What can you say about trauma in terms of the modern man is more equipped now to face it, get it on and deal with and solve it. What do you got to say about the modern man? Things are changing.
Yeah, I think, and it probably sounds like really simplistic, but, the people who I work with are carrying, just as Liza stated from the author, there's a lot of unconscious energy related to trauma that is intergenerationally passed down to them unknowingly. And so when I work with people, they're describing, and I know of their pain, but their symptoms are so much more deeper. So it would be almost like, somebody going to the ER who has scraped their knee. And so a scraped knee is not a big deal, but it's like a brush burn, it hurts. But they're describing this pain almost as if their kneecap is hanging off. And so when I'm talking to people and I'm listening to their stories and I'm hearing this description of this deeper pain, for me, that gives me the signal that there is so much more going on and that their pain is interconnected. And so what happens is, because most people are unaware, because you're living out this pain and you really truly believe that it's yours and yours alone, you're not thinking that it could be possibly linked to other generations
Exactly
in
right.
your family.
Yeah, right.
So just having
you're saying we're more in a position where we're ready to look at this type of stuff.
yes, and believe it. And believe
Good.
it. Because when I use that example, it makes sense. When you really take a step back and you think about it, it just makes sense that, yeah, why do I feel so anxious about this? It has to be more to it. And there is more to it. So it's really just, people are starting to become curious about their pain in a way that they haven't before.
I think
So,
that's a real good story.
When I started to read this, it reminded me of you and the work that you do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It seems what he does is very shamanic and very valid. And it reminded me of what you do.
Deneen, thank you very much. I know I was picking on you, but you can get even with me later on. I'm gonna pick on several other people because we have such a good crowd here. Dr. John Stegall, my good friend, I'd like to ask you, John. I don't know enough about it. I know you've been up to your eyeballs with this for the last 10 years. What the hell is happening with education in terms of what we talked about tonight? I know you're an expert on the outer planets. You're really, really good with Eris and Pluto, etc. What's happening with all educational levels in terms of, are we waking up?
Yeah, I would say so. We are. And I think what my sense of things is that we're starting to see the rumblings of how education is going to change because of COVID, because of the need to address kind of like the fundamental understanding of the country, our origins, all the issues that have gotten up to this point. So what I mean to say by that is, I think we're going to see a couple of things. We're going to see a structural transformation of education. I think we're also going to see a shift back into how education can support us in our communities. For a long time, schools have been like these silos, right? They've been these fortresses where you go, you get knowledge, and then you leave. They're supposed to train you, like the assembly line, literally the assembly line. You
Babysitter.
went in, got your degree, or babysitting, right?
Yeah.
And now we're going to see, I think, going forward into the Pluto and Aquarius era and beyond, we're going to see education that's super relevant, that supports us in understanding what it means to be a citizen. I think that's really where we're going with education.
Well, that's excellent. And that kind of is the higher dimension of Pluto and Capricorn. Thank you very much, John. That was really, really good to hear. I'm going to get to you, the other Dr. John, here in a minute. I want to turn to Linda now. Linda's a good friend and student of ours in the Pittsburgh area. And she is a professor of literature at a local college. I want to ask you the same kind of question because you've been teaching college age kids for quite a while. You can see change. What are you seeing?
I think there's no way to tell exactly what's going to happen. I mean, it's one of those things that it can go either way. A lot of people complain, for example, we have what we call high flex classrooms now with some of the kids on Zoom. We have kids in Bolivia. We have kids all over the world taking classes in our little tiny university right now. And at night, on Tuesday nights, I teach a course in World War II literature and film, because I'm trying to address the Nazi problem in this country by sort of exposing that. And what's happened this semester is everything has changed. We changed the curriculum, and I moved this course to a different basket of the curriculum that requires reports. And instead of doing like reports at the end of the semester where the kids get up and talk about things, what I do is just say, you got to come in ready to talk about this movie and you're going to teach it. You're going to go, and it's changed everything. It's changed everything. And now they're talking with each other and to each other in ways that's never happened. So my teaching is changing, and I can only I'm wrapped up in that right now. And that's about what I can say. But I wanted to say one other thing. First of all, my head has been blown off by this event, and we need to talk about this more. But when we were talking about Eris, it hit me like a ton of bricks that the George Floyd murder was an Eris event.
Yeah.
That 17-year-old girl standing there with a cell phone. She's born maybe 18 months before Eris was discovered. Now think about that. And Greta Thunberg today testifying in front of Congress, she's born in 2003. So maybe 2 years before Eris was discovered. So I think there's a whole generation of people who come in that orb of that discovery who are going to absolutely change the world. And those are the kids I'm teaching right now.
Well, that's
Those
Mama.
are the kids
She
I'm
is
teaching
she
right
is a Capricorn. Thank you, Linda. That's some really good insight from people that are really doing it on the street. Thank you very much.
now. You're welcome.
John, I want to get to you because I haven't picked on you in a long time. Well, the reason I want to get to you, John, it's been in our face so much the past month, the legal system. John is a lawyer, and I would imagine that when you're looking at systems, one of the top systems we need to really revamp is the legal system. What's the status of, I know you're a great thinker, what's the status of the legal system in terms of changing?
Well, I became a lawyer to probably when I was a little kid, I had a desire to do something different, like be a priest or to be a missionary. But I became a lawyer because it was a more practical thing to do. And I became a very good trial lawyer. And I got to a point where this system is so broken. It is just so broken. I can't stand it anymore. But I love being a lawyer. So I became a pro bono lawyer, doing law for free. And then I was representing people that were in trauma and parents who were having their children removed from them because they abused them, but often they were overly overaccused by Children's Health Services. It got very aggressive and identified abuse where it wasn't even there. And it just was so bad, so bad. And the stress of working in that system just made me finally want to retire. So I retired. And now I'm an emeritus lawyer. I can do pro bono work. But I teach in the law school, I teach paralegals, and they are going to be helping lawyers in the legal system. And often what I tell them is that they're better off being paralegals than being lawyers because of all the stress in the system. The system is traumatic. It inflicts trauma on the lawyers, on the parties, on the judges.
Why is it so traumatic? Why is it so broken?
Because of the way the law developed. The law developed in a country where the values were very much for the wealthy, for the solid citizens.
England,
England, yeah. It's odd. It's just
they've got a class system.
when someone suggested that I become a lawyer because I was so smart, and I was insulted that they even suggested that.
Well,
But
thank God you got a lot of Gemini, because Geminis can laugh things off better than most.
the system is broken.
Are you seeing any hope there?
Yes, I see
Are
legislation.
you?
Yes, because of the idea that some folks are trying to change the law, and they're trying to get better laws, and like what's happening in America right now, trying to get legislation like this one about allowing abused kids who are abused by priests, but now they're too old because the statute of limitations shuts them out, giving them more time to do that. I mean, there are people trying to change the law. It's
Yeah.
what's going on everywhere else is going on in the law as well, but it has to change. And it
Well-
just, people who are pissed off, just can't take any more of this. The law,
Okay. They can't take any more. They can't take any more gland that's inside you throbbing is Eris.
absolutely,
Everybody learn that. That's the throbbing inside you. You can't take it anymore. That's very Uranian, but it's very much Eris. But the difference is Eris is not going to take anymore. Okay. Thank you very much, John. That was really good. I want to ask, we could go on forever with this discussion, but I want to end it with Liza, because Liza and I have a friend in Pittsburgh, a friend who showed up in Pittsburgh that we met, and he's an internationally known author. And I really need you to know this man in case you don't. You may have heard of him. And she's very high on his list.
He's high on my list.
He's high. He's probably high in California. No, or Colorado. He's high on your list. And let's tell us about Charles Eisenstein.
Okay, well, his work over the past number of years. When did we first meet him?
About 2009.
Okay, well,
About 2009.
right before we met him, he had published a book called Sacred Economics. And he has since published a number of other books, one being called The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. This is an extremely brilliant and thoughtful man who, again, Sacred Economics is about economics and how the different types of economic systems that have been tried throughout the world, throughout history, and explaining how our economic system works, and talks about what is money really, and how we could design an economic system for our country and the world that would really respond to the challenges that we face and make things fairer for people. It's a pretty big book, but it's really fascinating. I mean, I would encourage you to read it. But if you don't read that, or his other books, I would definitely suggest that you read The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible, which is a title that just sounds
Our
wonderful.
beautiful world, our hearts know is
The
possible.
More Beautiful World.
The more beautiful world, our hearts know is possible.
And that is a series of related essays on subjects, and he's very introspective and honest about himself as he writes these things. He also does an awful lot of research. If you love footnotes and having all your ideas supported by research, he's your man. But it's just a variety of subjects about, and he's written a separate book about climate change since, but he writes about economic issues, social issues, interpersonal relationships. Did I say climate change? All of the challenge that we have been talking about tonight in a very thoughtful and hopeful way. And he has an online presence, and he's always offering workshops, and he's always teaching. So if you would like somebody to inspire you and about making a difference in the world we're in today and taking advantage of the energy of Eris and other planets we've talked about.
He knows astrology too.
And yeah, well, he knows some things about astrology as well. That's true. Very kind and young man. He's very young to be
Yeah,
so
he's not.
wise.
He's in his 40s probably.
I think he might be 50 some now. But anyway,
He's awful bright.
yes.
Anyhow, we did a number again. Claudia, we did it again. What the hell? We did it with Astrology Unplugged. Thanks for everybody being here. Special thanks to my partner, Liza Jane, for being put on the spot. And you danced real well when I was shooting the floor with my handgun here. You were dancing pretty good. But Claudia, I think what the hell, we did it again. And it's just another sign that we have such a marvelous, and Linda, hello. We have such a marvelous group of people. And I just want to leave you with the thought that, well, next week I'll announce to you next week what's happening, because I don't know yet. But I will leave you with the thought that this will be up on YouTube in a couple hours. And the thought is, if you got 10 loaves of bread, go to 9 neighbors, will you? Take it to 9 neighbors and share the bread you got. And I guarantee you, it won't be a stupid thing to do. It will be a smart thing to do. And all kinds of things will come back to you. Okay? Thank you, honey.
Thank you.
Thank you, Liza
Thank you
Jane.
all.
Thank you, Rick.
Great.
Thanks,
Thanks, Liza.
Good to see
Thanks,
you.
Rick.
Everybody,
All you wise people.
Thank you
Happy
both.
Earth Day.
Happy
Happy Earth
birthday.
Day. Happy Earth